Hey everyone, I thought I'd give a quick overview of the operations here on the Hill Valley subdivision and kind of go through each train and the work that it does. So, just a quick recap if you haven't watched the channel before. This is staging. These are my staging tracks here. I have 5 eastbound and 5 westbound staging tracks, plus these two staging tracks up here in what I call upper staging. I have power switches down here for all of the staging tracks on the lower level, and these two are power switches for the staging tracks on the upper level. Those serve a couple of purposes, but the number one purpose is it keeps all the locomotives from sitting there just drawing power when they're not being run. My method for operations are just simple switch lists. I've considered going to like car card system or something like that, and I'm still debating that. But as for now, I just use a switch list like this one. This one's fairly complex, but you can see it says whether it's a set out or a pickup, the road number of the car, what kind of car it is, what color it is, and where you're setting it out or picking it up. So let's just take a quick look at the overall route on the layout so that you're familiar with it if you haven't seen the channel before. So we'll run eastbound. So eastbound out of staging. We come across this lift out section that's for my utility room in case I need to get anything in and out of there. And we arrive at Lars Farms. Through Lars Farms and along the highway here, we eventually arrive at Hill Valley. Here in Hill Valley, we have a passenger depot, we have a freight depot, and we have a fuel company with both oil and coal. We then proceed through the tunnel around the bend here to Bryant's Gap. There are no industries here at Bryant's Gap, but there is a siding for meat if we need to have a meat, or if you need to do some runaround work, which I'll talk about later. You proceed into the tunnel there. You exit the tunnel over here, back up along the ridge, and eventually enter that tunnel down there at the other end of the room. And you exit that tunnel over here. Over here, off the main, is the town of Coronet. Coronet has Rogers Brothers Potato Processing, a feed mill, and a cement plant. It also has a passenger depot with a small freight dock. The main continues along here and eventually ends up back in staging. You can also see that you can exit Coronet westbound and end up in the upper staging. Now, of course, if you're running a westbound train, you just go the other direction. All right, so let's talk about the trains. As I've mentioned, I have 5 eastbound tracks, 5 westbound tracks, and these pockets down here, which I 3D printed, correspond to each track. So here's your switch list for eastbound 1, eastbound 2, eastbound 3, etc. So this first train out of eastbound 1 is a through freight. If we look at the card, it does no local work. So what that means is this train leaves staging eastbound, runs all the way around the layout, and comes right back where it started. It comes in from here, runs through staging on this center track, which I consider the main, and then backs back in where it started from. The train on eastbound track 2 is a turn. Here is its switch list. As you can see, it's fairly involved, has quite a bit of work to do. So that train leaves staging eastbound track 2, heads east, and actually stops right over here at Lars Farms. Here at Lars Farms, it picks up from the produce shed and from the grain elevator. Once it's picked those cars up, it proceeds eastbound through Hill Valley. And it doesn't do any work in Hill Valley. It proceeds over the mountain and arrives over at Coronet. Once that train arrives here in Coronet, it picks up the cars from the industry. So it picks up both the reefers and the box cars from Rogers. It picks up the box cars from the feed mill, and it picks up the set of cars that are in the hopper shed here at the cement plant. It then moves the cars from this track into the hopper shed track and sets out a new string of 3 hoppers onto this track. That train then takes all of those cars it's picked up and builds a new train with it and sets out the cars from the grain elevator here, some cars that's already got in the train when it leaves staging here to Rogers, and the refrigerator cart picked up from the farm and another refrigerator car, and sets those out here at Rogers as well. It's then got a new consist, which is made up of all of the cars that it has picked up here in Coronet. It moves the caboose to the other end of the train, moves the locomotives here, and turns around and runs back westbound back to where it came. When that train arrives back here at Lars Farms, it will set out a refrigerator car here at the produce shed and 2 empty box cars to the grain elevator to be loaded with more grain. Now that makes this an opposing siding because you're going westbound now, so you have to use this siding to do some runaround work in order to be able to shove those cars up in there. Once that's done, the train proceeds westbound back into staging and terminates back in the same track it started from. So the train on track 3 is an eastbound passenger train. It is the Coronet Daily. Here's the list for it. So it departs staging eastbound, runs past Lars Farms. Once that train arrives here in Hill Valley, it does a passenger stop here at the Hill Valley Depot, and then proceeds on its way to Coronet. Once that train arrives here in Coronet, it will make a passenger stop here at the Coronet Passenger Depot. And while it's making a passenger stop, it actually has a couple of head-end cars on it. It has a mail car and another Railway Express Agency refrigerator car like this one on it. So it will set those 2 cars out here at the dock, and it will pick up this car. Once it's done its work and performed its passenger stop, it will proceed westbound out of Coronet to upper staging. Now, right now, there's no room for it to terminate, but during an op session on the schedule, this passenger train runs first, so it will be gone when that train comes up, and that train can terminate here on this track. The next train from eastbound 4, here's its switch list right here. That is a through freight. There is no local work. So that train just leaves staging eastbound, runs through Hill Valley, over the mountain, past Coronet, and back here to staging, back to the same track it originated on. Before we talk about the last train out of eastbound staging, let's talk about this train here in upper staging track 1. This train eventually will have locomotives from a different railroad. I haven't decided yet, where I'm modeling a fictitious area of the country. I haven't decided, probably Southern Pacific, but I haven't decided for sure yet. So it'll have a different railroad's locomotives and caboose on it. But the idea with this train is this train runs from upper staging here into Coronet and sets out its entire train on one of these 2 tracks. It then waits until the next train we're going to talk about out of staging gets here, and we'll continue to talk about that in a bit. Okay, now this last eastbound train out of eastbound staging comes out of eastbound 5. Here's the switch list for it. Not quite as involved as the other one, but it does have some work to do. So it departs staging eastbound out of track 5 and runs to Hill Valley. Once that train's here in Hill Valley, it picks up from the freight depot here, as well as the tank cars from the fuel company here. And then it proceeds eastbound to Coronet. Once that train's in Coronet, it will pick up the cars that came down with the train from upper staging and takes those back westbound. And at the same time, or thereabouts, the locomotives that were with that train from upper staging take the cars that you just brought up and take them back to upper staging to someplace else. Once you arrive back here in Hill Valley with that train that you just interchanged, you'll set tank cars back out to the fuel company here, and you'll set cars back out to the freight depot there. Now, this train, both directions, going up to Coronet and coming back, you'll have an opposing siding each way. So there's some runaround work to do. So you have a couple of options. You can do runaround work using these two tracks, the main and the siding here. However, that risks you gumming up the passenger siding, and you also have to run all the way through Hill Valley and all the way up here to this crossover in order to run around. I have found it easier to run through this tunnel over here to Bryant's Gap and use this siding to do your runaround work. It's closer, and you don't run the risk of gumming up the passenger siding at Hill Valley. So you do your runaround work here and then run back around to Hill Valley to finish your work there. Once you've set out the cars here at the fuel company and at the freight depot, that train then proceeds westbound to staging and terminates back in the same track it originated from. All right, now we're to the westbound tracks. Westbound track 1 is open because this westbound passenger train with 844 on it, when it runs through Coronet and Hill Valley, it actually terminates on westbound track 1. The next train here on westbound track 2 is a through freight. It doesn't do any work. It just runs westbound out of staging, around the layout, and comes back where it started. Track 3 here is a small reefer express. As of right now, that train is a through train. It doesn't do any work. I have a couple of ideas that I'm trying to work out in my head to make it work in conjunction with the train that picks up the refrigerator cars from Rogers Brothers. So it's bringing a new iced car to Rogers Brothers or something like that. But I haven't quite worked out those details yet. So as of now, that train is a through train that doesn't do any local work. The next train on the westbound track is this small coal train here on westbound track 4. And it does do a little bit of work at Hill Valley. So that coal train departs staging westbound from westbound staging 4, runs around the layout, and arrives at Hill Valley. Here at Hill Valley, that small coal train picks up this empty hopper and sets out a loaded hopper here at the coal trestle here at the fuel company. Now, depending on how things are going with a couple of the other jobs, these tank cars may or may not be in your way when you set that car out. So you may have to work with that, but there's no opposing sidings here. This is a fairly simple job to just set out that car and pick up a car here. Once you've set out and picked up here, that train continues westbound back to staging. And the last train out of staging here is on westbound track 5. It's this small stock special. Here is its switch list. You can see it's got a little bit of work to do over at Lars Farms. So it departs westbound, runs through the layout, through Hill Valley to Lars Farms. Once at Lars Farms, it sets out a stock car here at the stock yard and picks up a stock car. Now that means that's an opposing siding, so you've got a little runaround work to do here on this siding in order to shove that car up in there and pull the existing one out. And depending on how things have gone, these cars may or may not be here and be in your way. So if they're in your way, you're going to have to work around that. You'll have to move them out of the way and do your spot and your pickup, and then put those cars back. Once that train has done its work with the stock cars here at the stockyard, it proceeds westbound and terminates back in staging. So that's it. That's the 11 trains that I have set up to run. As I think I mentioned, any train that does work, once everything's done, we're ready for cycle 2 and can run again. So in an op session, I can very easily run 22 trains if we have the operators to do so and everyone has the time. Running one cycle through in my test operating sessions takes between 2 and 2.5 hours. And so that's a pretty decent operating session just in and of itself. So I don't know if we'll ever need to do that, but it's nice because it's reset and ready for the next op session almost immediately. Anyway, that's an overview of the different jobs on the Hill Valley subdivision and what they entail. As you may have picked up, there are some fairly simple jobs that are one car set out and pick up with no opposing sidings. There's some intermediate jobs that are a little more difficult with maybe some runaround work with some opposing sidings or something like that. And then there's the more difficult job up at Coronet where you're playing musical chairs with covered hoppers and you're turning around and running back the other direction. So I like to have a little bit of a mix so that if someone's a little newer to operations, they can still operate and switch some cars, but it's not overwhelming. And someone who's a little more experienced might have a little bit of a challenge with a couple of the more advanced jobs. Anyway, that's about it. I don't want to ramble on too much longer, so I'm just going to end this video here. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you feel like doing so, and we'll see you next time.